Lovely. So there are a few more just coming in, but while they're connecting, I will say hello to the 70 plus of you who we've got in today's meeting, which is fabulous, and a great start for my 2021 Zoom calendar as well. For those of you I don't know or who I haven't met yet, my name's Anna Burley. I am the Co-operative Party's Policy Officer, and I'm also a Labour and Co-op councillor in South London. So for all those councillors on the call, I share your pain. Those of you who were joining for the delight of Emma Hoddinott, I'm afraid she's stuck in her full council meeting. It's running very long, so she's hoping to be able to join us later, but if she doesn't, please don't take it personally. I know she was really looking forward to this evening's event. So a little bit of housekeeping from me. The first is that you'll notice that you're all muted. That's so that we don't accidentally, we've got over 80 people on this call and we don't want to be talking over each other or hearing the trucks go past outside your house or the smoke alarm go off or whatever. So please keep yourself muted. Speakers will unmute themselves one at a time when it's their turn to speak, and then we'll have time for some question and answer at the end. And you can unmute yourself when you ask your question, but if I could ask that you put yourself back on mute just so that we cut out background noise, that would be really helpful. The second thing to let you know is that we are recording this session. I know that while we've got lots of you on today's call, there are lots who can't join us, especially where councillors have got their evening meetings, who are keen to catch up on what we talk about. So we make these recordings available on our YouTube channel. You're very welcome to watch again, share it with people, but it helps us make sure that everyone gets a chance to take part. I think my main third thing is that we are closed captioning today. So if that is helpful for you, you can go down to the bottom of your screen and there's a closed caption button. In terms of the other buttons down here, when it comes to question and answer, you can use, if you go to reactions, there's a raise hand button. You're also able to thumbs up or clap or give a heart or something to our speakers. They're all fairly friendly, so I don't need to tell you to be nice. I'm sure you would be anyway. We also have a chat function. It's a little distracting, so if you want to get into detailed chats with someone else on the call, there is the option to message them separately without having to write to everybody. But if you want to ask a question, you can also pop it in the chat, and I'll be able to get onto that there as well. With so many of you on the call, there is a good chance we're not going to manage to get through everyone's question, but if our speakers are happy, then I'm sure they'd be okay to have questions sent to them after the event. And then my final thing to say is an apology from Councillor Arooj Shah. They've got an urgent meeting this evening and unfortunately have had to drop out at the very last minute. We hope to get them on a future Zoom because we really wanted to hear about what they're doing in Oldham. So apologies if you're here for Arooj, but not to worry because we have Danny, Vince and Salma, and a really interesting discussion to look forward to. So I think rather than you having to listen to me for too much longer, I'll just do a quick introduction to our speakers and then I'm going to hand over first to Danny. So hopefully you're all on the right Zoom. We're going to be looking at what we've learned from the last lockdowns and sort of what went well, what didn't go well, how cooperative councils have responded in different ways and supported their communities and residents, and then sort of how we take those lessons forward into this lockdown and this year, and highlight both some of the lessons we're going to be putting into practice, some of the innovations we're doing, but also the issues that we're concerned about over the coming months. So loads to go through. We are really lucky with our guest speakers. Our first guest is Danny Thorpe. Danny is joining us from Greenwich Council, where he's the leader, and before Christmas led the move to close schools in his area in the face of rising infections. So took a tough stance against the government and was ultimately proven correct in the assessment of the situation and the need to take action. So I'm going to hand over to Danny and then we'll introduce our next speakers as we get to them.
Thanks so much, Anna, and good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you all. and I would say Happy New Year, but it doesn't really feel like that so far, I think, for many of us. I think broadly speaking, in sort of December, you know, we were feeling content. Things were becoming tricky, but broadly we were kind of rolling along with the kind of community response that we'd had, and that had been a sort of standout feature of the pandemic. We were providing all of our support to businesses and kind of continuing as normal. But actually then what happened was our infection rate started to rise and we started to encounter problems. It's become one of the most difficult things about this whole argument that actually I didn't ever intend to close schools completely. And indeed, we never asked for schools to close completely. And as a teacher, I'm absolutely passionate that the right place for all children is in the classroom to be supported. But the challenge that we had was that actually we saw this kind of unbelievable rise in the speed of infection. We had 3,600 children who were isolating across Greenwich. We had over 300 staff who we'd lost. And indeed, 2 of our schools had already had to close because they'd simply run out of staff to operate safely. Over that weekend, people became more agitated about the situation, not just in Greenwich, but across London. We were called on to a call, London-wide call, where we were told very clearly, and I wrote it down, that what we were seeing was exponential growth of the virus that demanded immediate action. Now, I have to say, you know, I challenge anyone to have been in that position in terms of dealing what they were dealing with and hear those words and think, right, what steps can I take in order to help, in order to protect people? And I was never ever interested in a courtroom battle with the government because frankly, we didn't have time. But given all the challenges that we had and looking at the data, it seemed totally logical to make a local decision and ask schools to change the way they were doing things for those final few days. I think also what kind of was really evident to me was it wasn't just about the data, but I was speaking to local heads. As a former teacher in Greenwich, I sort of have some, you know, good connections with people on the ground, and people were on the phone in tears telling me not only had they had the worst week of the pandemic, they'd had the worst teaching weeks of their lives in terms of trying to manage, you know, what was an increasingly difficult situation. So it was a real surprise that actually the government behaved in the way that they did and threatened us with legal action for asking schools to go to the mixed model of learning that they then instructed everyone to do at a secondary level 2 weeks later and at a collective level across the country 3 weeks later. It's really worth pointing out as well that actually on the day that we were threatened with legal action, the infection rate within Greenwich was 254 per 100,000. Now, actually, in relation to what we've seen, you know, even then we were kind of feeling that pressure, but that pressure was just growing. Today's figure is 1,077 people per 100,000. So in terms of that exponential growth, it's absolutely manifested itself. And certainly my inbox is full of families, teachers, and other people who are absolutely clear that they contracted coronavirus in a school setting because in their view it was the only place that they could contract it. And indeed the Prime Minister himself has finally and belatedly acknowledged that schools were clearly vectors in the spread of the virus. We've also had other major challenges. Our hospital was one of the first in London to declare a major incident. It's an incident that's still ongoing. It was, I think, almost 2 weeks since they declared that. So it was really shocking today to find the Secretary of State speaking to the Select Committee and getting it wrong again. And actually, you know, the fact is that Matt Hancock stood up in Parliament, I think just over an hour before he threatened us with that legal direction and explained that there was this new variant. And clearly, the new variant was still being understood. But in the round, the new variant completely explains why we were feeling that kind of local pressure and challenge. And certainly on Friday, when we had 3,600 children in self-isolation, by Monday, that figure was over 4,000, and it's just continued to rise. I mean, I think what all of this kind of unfortunately shows is that, and this is a story throughout the pandemic, that they've just simply refused to learn, is that we have a group of people in power who are absolutely convinced that a central Whitehall approach to the world is the way forward. And whether that's in the shielding debacle that we had with those boxes being sent out, 22 billion plus on a test and trace system run from the centre that isn't working, and the scandal that we've seen in the last 24 hours around school meals. they just simply refuse to trust that local people can make local decisions. And interestingly, in all of the defence that's been put forward today, the main bone of contention with the DfE seems to be that a council chose, in their view, to act in a unilateral fashion. But at no point, when Nick Gibb was writing threatening letters to governors and heads of trust, and not even copying the local authority in, did any of them ring up and say, actually, what could we do to help? What do you need? You know, so the cooperation really that we had was all at a local level, being pulled back by a government who are completely determined to run things from the centre. I suppose, obviously, we are where we are now, and we're doing our best to support schools. We actually had a testing system in place because we decided in Greenwich that we didn't think it was fair for our school staff to be running that over Christmas and trying to set that up. We opened on the 2nd of January prior to all of the changes. And in those first 3 days, we tested over 2,000 children, young people and teachers in Greenwich. And actually, the positivity rates and the rate of infection kind of, really proved the point, really, that actually going back in January would not have been the right thing to do. I think, kind of for us now, moving forward in terms of what's going well, I think ultimately what this has proved to me is that people are so frustrated with government communications that it feels like I've got worse and worse in terms of what you can do, what you can't do, and frankly, who they trust and who they don't trust. And we've got people looking to the council, I think, in a way that they perhaps weren't 3 or 4 weeks ago, to say, actually, I trust a local group of people to make the decision based on what's best for our area. And yeah, there may be other areas who've had higher rates of infection, but what we're interested in is having a group of people in power who are going to stand up for us and do their best to protect us on that very basic level. I think what this has also shown is also what's possible at a local level. And we've sent them countless examples of the work that we're doing around testing. Testing in schools is really difficult and complex. And actually, the idea that schools would ever be able to pull this off on their own, I think, is a total joke, really. But also really goes back to the critical role that we can play, not just as local councils, but as people who have responsibilities for public health, and actually discharging those responsibilities in a way to support people. Emma had asked me to say what else is going well, and I think even in the darkest times now, that sort of renewed volunteer effort in Greenwich is really manifesting itself. I was out yesterday with a group of volunteers at our vaccination centre. One of the, I think we've got 4 up and running now across the borough. And that was amazing, meeting 97-year-olds who have not left the house since March. And certainly when I came home last night, I thought, well, I'm 144 people closer to a dance floor than I was at the start of the morning. So actually, if you can get the opportunity to get out and get volunteering, I think through the local primary care networks is how we're making it work. And I know St John's has a few issues. So I think getting into that and getting the vaccine moving, because, a couple of days ago, here they were again telling us there was no clamour for 24-hour vaccinations. Today, we've had an acknowledgement that actually we can and we will have 24-hour vaccination programme. And I know many people who'd be queuing around the block all night, frankly, if that's what it took to get out. And I think the key point is, once again, we've got local councils and local governments stepping up to do their bit to support our communities throughout in exactly the same way as we have done for 9 months. And I guess the worry and the hope is that, now is really the time with this vaccination programme for the government to recognise what we can do, to trust us to do that. And the political, I think, reality for the kind of medium to long term is we should be proud of everything that we've done as a sector, because clearly without us, more people would have died. There's no doubt about that. But we can never let these people forget the damage that they've done, and we need to work really hard together so that once we get on the other side of vaccinations, we get that honest conversation with people about the failure of a centralised state approach to taking us through this as a country. Thanks, Hannah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to join your 97-year-old on the dance floor as soon as possible, leading the charge there. So in the absence of Aruj, our next speaker is going to be Councillor Vince Maple. He's leader of the Labour and Co-operative group in Medway. Medway, as those of you with a working knowledge of Southeast geography, has been part of the country where we've had some of the worst infection rates due to the new strain. And Vince has been helping to sort of lead some excellent work that he'll be able to talk on now. So Vince, if you're unmuted, please go for it. Lovely, there we go. And wins the prize for the best branded speaker today.
Never knowing the off-brand. Thank you, Anna, and thank you for expanding my introduction to being more than Medway's had a very high rate of coronavirus. That is a statement of fact. Thanks everybody, and for the opportunity to share some bits and pieces with what's been going on here. I firstly want to start by saying, actually, Danny, you've done a tremendous job, and actually for us down the other end of the A2, particularly in your most challenging times before Christmas, thanks for doing the right thing. And that's, for me, what's really been important about the last 10 months, and will be important probably about the next 10 months and beyond, is actually the clues in the name of most of the people on this call: cooperative, Labour and councillor, because actually they're the three things which are going to get us through this, frankly. As Anna kindly said, I'm leader of the Labour and cooperative group in Medway. We're in opposition with the main opposition group, and I can see my friend and colleague Pat Cooper as one of the people on the call today. We took a decision very early on, within probably a week or two, in fact less than that, probably within the first week of there clearly being a national problem here. We were going to be a constructive opposition. This was not about political point scoring at any point. This was far too serious a matter for that to be the case. And I wrote to the leader of the council to that effect. And I think it's fair to say what's been interesting is that the difference between the first 5 months, I would say, where actually things were very cordial. The first full council meeting we had directly afterwards, which I think was St George's Day off the top of my head, that was very statesman-like, for want of a better word. None of the normal politics. Medway's quite a political council in that sense. And of course, our numbers were very, very low at that point, and everything was okay relative to perhaps certainly other parts of the country which were struggling more at that point. Come the second half of the year, and as Anna has said, at points we were the highest rate in the country. Tonight we're still just under 1,000 per 100,000. We've lost more than 500 residents to COVID. These are real. I think one of the problems we've had with all of this is some of the numbers are so big, you kind of forget the personal and the individual. And I think one of our roles as kind of community leaders is to recognise that actually that today 6 people, 6 families, 6 neighbours, they have lost a loved one. I'm really proud of the work that we've done as the opposition in Medway, and that's looked at many different things. So one of the things we decided in the summer was to put out a newsletter, and Izzy's very kindly going to email this around. And it's slightly different to some of the other. We don't normally do a Medway-wide newsletter. Actually, that's not a very common thing. So we chose to do that. On the front page is Mark Prenter, one of our councillors, who happens to be a key worker as well. Some of you may have seen Mark. He was one of those who was involved with Angela's campaign for getting key workers to step up and stand to be councillors. He's fantastic. He's a train driver and also a brilliant Labour councillor. And actually, colleagues across Medway, our 20 councillors, have done some amazing things. And you'll see that if you have a look at the newsletter. And we try to highlight as many of the different things people were doing. So whether it's taking part in the NHS volunteering scheme, actually a couple of Labour councillors worked with people from other political parties, I have to say not the Tories, to set up a Medway mutual aid, which has now become a CIC. So that's the longer term, that's a bit of embeddedness which has come from the terrible circumstances we found ourselves in. We also very purposefully, we thought this was important. A couple of our councillors have got quite serious medical conditions. So we were very clear that actually one of the things we want to say is actually we are like you, the Great British Medway public. So actually not all 20 of us have been out there on the front line, because if we were doing that, that would have been exactly the wrong thing to do. So and that was a really important message. And we know from the leaflets going out, when they've been allowed to go out, there's still a few stuck in my porch at the moment. They'll go out eventually. that actually people valued not only all the things that Labour councillors were doing, but also recognising that actually it was right and proper for some people to be on Zoom calls, take emails, and not be out there front and centre. And I think that was the right decision to take. The second half of the year, I think let's focus on that for a minute or two. So we, in some ways similar to Danny, actually, it was becoming increasingly clear to us here in Medway that actually schools, and particularly secondary schools at that point, were a massive issue. And at that point, we wrote to both the Regional Schools Commissioner, because actually not a single one of our secondary schools is an LEA school. They're all academies or free schools. So actually, the leader of the council could have said, yeah, I completely agree with you, Vince. But actually, even if he did say that, there's nothing he could do. It was out of his hands. Less so with primary schools. But the Regional Schools Commissioner, I think I will look back at those letters in years to come and go, actually, you were lying to us. There's no doubt about that. You were lying to us. So from that perspective, I think it is right that we will continue to push that message. We've now said we think schools should remain online until we are out of tier 4, which is what we were in prior to the national lockdown. A couple of other quick things before we finish. We've continued to campaign as much as we can and be out there for residents. So all of the kind of quasi-judicial stuff, so planning and licensing, which all councillors love. If there's been stuff happening in our wards, we haven't been campaigning because that's been the right decision. But if there's decisions being made, we are still letting residents know that that's the case. And similarly, we've had we're in the middle of a boundary review as well, not to throw any more fuel on that fire. But again, we've been talking to individuals in wards that have been impacted by that. From a personal perspective, I think the support from both parties, actually, let's talk about both parties, has been good and strong, and it's been welcome. And I think certainly as we move forward with the vaccination programme, I think it's right that we are talking about that, and we will be continuing to push that message. One of the things I've done from a personal perspective, because I don't have the machinery of the council, unfortunately, is started up a weekly Facebook video on a Sunday night. And the impact of it is such that I was at a funeral today, very sadly, hence the black tie. It was not because I'm at a co-op meeting. And the funeral director, Kate, who I know, but I don't know her well, came up to me and said, Vince, those weekly videos you put out, they're the best and most reliable form of information in Medway, which, that's a pretty, that's somebody who's within our community who is doing a really challenging job at the moment. We've just opened up the spare mortuary here in Kent. So, she's under pressure, but the fact that she came and took out time to get that, and that's getting between 6,000 and 8,000 views a week. So it's not a small amount. So again, from that perspective, from even in opposition, using those tools. But I think, I look back over the last 10 months, and I'll finish with this. I think we took the right approach right at the start to say we're not going to do politics for politics' sake, but it has absolutely been the right decision when we have had to do politics, that we've done it very clearly, we've done it with evidence, particularly around schools, and I firmly believe we will continue to do that as we go forward. Thanks very much.
Ian, thank you so much, Vince. And I think it's so important that when we think about the impact that Labour and cooperative councillors can have, that we don't only look to those councils where Labour and Co-op are in charge, but actually the impact that you can have from the opposition and the backbenchers. And it's really inspiring to hear what's been going on in Medway. I feel a bit sad to have missed out on the videos, if I'm honest. And I'm really excited that your mutual aid group has registered as a CIC. I think it's so impressive to see groups of people coming together and seeking to create something sort of sustainable and long term. So keep us updated on their progress. So my next speaker that I'm going to invite up is Councillor Salma Mumtaz. She's a Labour and Cooperative Councillor in Nottingham, and she comes here on the glory chariot, or whatever one would say, of the CCLA Councillor Awards, where she won the COVID-19 Hero Award. So I'm sure she's going to have lots of impressive things to inspire us with, I hope. Maybe a bit about what you're hoping to do next, and make us all feel deeply inadequate in a nice way. But no, over to you, Salma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, colleagues. My name is Salma Mumtaz, and I am a proud Labour and Co-operative councillor for Baseford Ward, Nottingham North. It's an honour to be invited this evening as a guest speaker regarding my LGIU National COVID-19 Hero Award. I'm absolutely honoured to be recognised for my tireless work in our communities. During the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, I volunteered with a grassroots social justice charity called HIMA. I delivered large quantities of nutritional food parcels, especially not the ones seen across social media recently, for which the Prime Minister has ordered an investigation. It is shameful in this sixth richest country to see so much food poverty and broken welfare system that has placed thousands of people in crisis. But this is us, Labour values at its core. As our leader said today, the British people always step up in an emergency. In my working life, I am a key worker in the NHS, and during the lockdown, I took a milestone step to work on frontline services, especially being a BAME and grouped in a high category of vulnerability. This was purely done to keep the NHS vital services running, and I'm grateful for those who nominated me to win this award. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks. I don't know, I'm going to kick off on questions, Chair's prerogative, and all, but Salma, what have you got, sort of, as we're in our, well, third national lockdown, but obviously lots of parts of the country have never really left lockdown. What's next?
So what's next? We're just following the news. I mean, we're volunteering at the food bank. I've just seen a high rise of food parcels coming through the system. It's obviously, it's the incompetent, government who's led us this way. When I am delivering food parcels on the doorstep, I'm hearing stories of the children not eating, not having food available. I'm hearing sad stories. They've lost their job during this pandemic. And also it's just, it is a rife at the moment with the food poverty. We are just seeing so much food poverty, and also the welfare system that's broken, and it just comes down to the Tories. But I will endeavour to work hard across my community in Nottingham to serve working class people and to fight for justice, and keep fighting until the government changes the welfare system and no child goes to bed hungry.
Yeah, and it feels a lot like we've got some open doors. As Danny pointed out, we have seen some government U-turns, albeit later than we might have liked. But thank you so much, Salma. It's really good to hear what you've been leading in Nottingham. I think now we have a bit of time available for questions. Some have been messaged through to Izzy, so I'll call you first while others of you pop your hands up or pop something in the chat to let us know that you'd like to say something. So I'm going to go first of all to Mohammed Aslam. Are you on the call still, Mohammed?
Yes, I'm still.
Lovely. Are you happy to ask your question, or would you like me to read it out for you?
I mean, I can sort of repeat what I said on the chat. I'm slightly concerned about the conflicting information coming from the government and the spokesperson for the vaccine. Initially, we were led to believe that you have to have second injection to be properly protected, and all of a sudden, we should be protected with one injection. And I don't know if some of you read this morning's papers or on the internet. So several people who have had first jab after a couple of weeks, which is the time period when you're supposed to develop antibodies, they actually contracted the virus. So we are not, given sufficient information as to the efficacy of one dose, whether we are protected, and we walk around with the false hope that we are now secure. And so we need some clarity from the government and transparency. Is it just shortage of vaccines, or we are being fooled? And on top of this, we know that this coronavirus isn't going to go anywhere. It's not.
Oh, sorry. There's a bit of noise coming in, so I think we muted you as well as Mike Mohammed, but completely take on the concerns around the phasing of the doses, something that came up in our South London-wide vaccination briefing today that I think a lot of people are anxious about, and where we've already got some anxiety about the vaccine. It adds to the challenge of having those conversations with members in our community and encouraging them to get vaccinated as soon as they're asked to attend an appointment. I don't know, Danny, Vince, or Salma, if there was any reflection that you had on the vaccination rollout in your areas, things that people are concerned about, or that you think has gone well in terms of communicating about how the rollout will happen. Feel free to jump in rather than Vince, is that you waving? Do you want to, are you able to unmute yourself? There we go.
Thanks, Anna. And Mohammed, you've raised a really important point there. Certainly from a Medway's perspective, funnily enough, the meeting I was just in beforehand, we've got about half a dozen sites currently with vaccinations going on. And here, one of them, which is not particularly in a labour and cooperative area, they're only doing 2 or 3 days a week because they're running out of vaccines. So I think that there are all sorts of, I guess, relatively minor issues in isolation, but when you start to add them up, that is a concern. I wholeheartedly agree with Mohammed on the issue of government communication. It's been terrible. We've all seen the Matt Lucas mocking of Boris Johnson, and that's funny because it's true, regrettably. And again, in a similar vein, pardon that slight pun, although it's not going in your vein, in a similar vein, the messaging around you must get both vaccines, and then all of a sudden, well, we'll delay it for up to 3 months, you'll be fine. That's just really unhelpful, really unhelpful. So I agree, the government's got to get its messaging clear and accurate on this, and consistent. I think saying one thing, then another, as Danny referred to the fact earlier on, they did this time and again with schools over the last few weeks. They did it with people going to work, not going to work. They did it with, and this is something which hasn't been spoken about enough. Loads of people were made redundant in October because they left it till the very last minute to say we're going to extend furlough. So their communication, let alone the policies, their communication has been terrible. And Mohammed, you raise a good point around that vaccine point as well.
Great. Danny, I saw that you'd unmuted yourself. Did you want to add to that at all?
So yeah, I was going to say, we did have a South East London briefing today. I would really encourage everyone to push in their sort of sub-regional areas for those to happen if they haven't already happened, because it was useful. And I think the honest answer is that government communications is never going to improve. So we're going to have to step in and build confidence in our communities in order to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And it's kind of as straightforward as that. Now, one of the things that we are really pushing on in South East London is that they must give us the evidence about how many of our residents have been vaccinated, particularly our Black and minority ethnic residents, because we are being sent horrendous scams and targeting, evidence of targeting of those communities by anti-vaxxers to sort of create that fear. And we know that those residents have suffered so much more on a disproportionate level to other groups. So we have got to work together, find those community leaders. We set up this week, we had a meeting of faith leaders in our borough, and we're going to do that now once a week moving forward, and try and bring people in who've been vaccinated, who are running the programme, to try and build confidence. And I think we just have to do that at a local level to try and get as many people on board as possible.
Great, thank you. I've got a couple of hands up and a couple of comments. So I'm going to go with Valerie first, then Colin. It's up to Shobha Srivastava, sorry, who said she'd like to ask a question, and we have Steve Hansom. So you'll be the next two after Valerie and Colin. So Valerie, hi, how are you? Do you want to, you're unmuted, brilliant, ask away.
Thanks, Happy New Year, Anna and everybody on the call, and sorry about the background noise. I want to just echo Councillor Danny's point, and just to kind of make sure there's no sort of misconceptions. It's not just about the anti-vaccine rhetoric and media that's being shared on WhatsApp especially, but it's the continuous of years of people feeling a bit, I guess, not a part of certain conversations, especially when it comes to medical research. So I think what we could do as a cooperative movement is actually try to reassure people by putting out some positive kind of good feel suggestions on what has been done in the past that has actually engaged Black, Asian and minority ethnics, especially in the Black community. In the African community at the moment, I think there is a massive worry about things obviously in the past of AIDS and HIV, and obviously the Ebola crisis that happened. So if we can get anything that can kind of counter it, it'll be really great. So just want to say thank you for everything you're doing, and really great work that I'm hearing now. Make sure I share it locally as well. Thank you.
And over to you, Colin, from one Lamberther to another.
Yes, thanks, Anna. A question really for the councillors, a sort of kind of big picture question really. If we didn't have a Tory government, let's just assume that Nirvana state, what would do you think we actually have the right structures in the councils and the communities to address this massive issue that affects communities on such a wide scale? Or do you think we are going to need a different approach, a completely different set of structures to address this sort of issue going forward? So I suppose what I'm asking is really, do we need to come up with a new set of policies and structures in order to create something that can respond to this sort of crisis? Because I've got a horrible feeling this won't be the last one. We'll have many more of these sorts of things, whether it's climate change or whatever. So do we need new structures to respond to these big emergencies?
Great. Shobha, are you around? Would you like to
yes, please.
Ask your question? Lovely. I'm sorry for stumbling over my words.
Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I must correct you. It is Shobha. Shobha. If you read it exactly the way it's written, Shobha is my first name and Srivastava is the second name. That's fine. Everybody does it, so you're not alone. The second thing is, I live in the northeast of England, in a place called South Shields. And sometimes it appears to me, as it did today, this is my very first meeting, that England stops in the Midlands, because nobody is thinking or talking about the North. The Northeast at this moment in time is suffering tremendously in every way. The second variant of the virus is creating havoc. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we've got a good group of people from Bangladesh, and the majority of them, well, I'm from India and I'm a retired doctor. The majority of them have restaurants. Now, when the restaurants closed, they felt they'd lost their livelihood. The women and the schools were closed, so the women were having to cook for 10 or 12 people, which they didn't normally have to do. And also domestic violence has gone up tremendously. not just the unemployed or the people from the restaurants beating up their wives and mothers and so on, but the young people, 16 to 18-year-olds, also what we call granny bashing was happening. So that's the first thing, the background from where I am speaking. I am chair of 2 charities that deal with the Black and minority ethnic communities. And also, I have seen the number of deaths that have happened from the COVID, not just among the public, I'm sorry to say public, but from the medical fraternity as well. Some of them are my junior doctors, I've taught them and so on. Anyway, so we are in dire straits, I can say that. The thing that about the vaccine, it was mentioned about the 2 jabs or the 1 jab and so on. And I sort of know a little bit, although, you know, it's all my own reading mostly. The first one, which was the Pfizer vaccine, which most people should get and probably have got 2 doses. I have as well, because I'm 87 years old. So I got priority and I got both the jabs. However, we are not sure because the research consisted of the first variant, and I know the second variant is completely different. That's being produced by the viruses as part of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. So they're trying to fight the humans and the humans are trying to fight them, and they want to win, of course, and they are winning at this moment in time. So anyway, so that was the first vaccine that was tested on volunteers after the first variant. So the first thing is people who have had the jabs mustn't get complacent. It does not, probably does not work on the second variant. We don't know yet. Not enough research has been done. And but you do, the first variant causes immunity by producing antibodies in the body. The second one boosts your immunity further, but that's not the important thing. It prolongs the immunity. And that's why it's the booster dose. Now with the other one, AstraZeneca, the Oxford one, why they're saying they want to give the first dose to a lot of people rather than give 2 doses to some and the others wouldn't get it, is because it will bring immunity to the people who get the first dose. And possibly by that time you'll get more doses and therefore people can get their second dose. So that's just a little clarification about the vaccines.
It's good to know that you're never far from an expert in a co-op party meeting. So thank you for jumping in. And I think there's sort of an important point there raised at the end for our speakers. Although you've had both jabs, you won't be leading the way onto the dance floor because we've got to warn against complacency even when people are getting vaccinated. And I think I certainly feel that that's going to be a very difficult message to communicate to people who really just want to hug their grandparents and parents for the first time in a year. So I don't know if that might be something that people can touch on. And I promised Steve that I would ask his question. Steve Hansom.
Hi there, folks. My question is, with the government pushing volunteering, which is obviously very noble and something that no doubt we all do in some capacity or other, how do we make sure that this push for volunteering doesn't actually result in charitisation of the sectors that really should be paid for by the state and done by fairly paid unionised workers? Now, particularly when there's so many people unemployed, including those unemployed who actually don't know it yet, the furloughed. So there's all these people who are unemployed who really would benefit from effectively a jobs creation scheme or a government funded scheme. So that's my point, is how do we, and I'm not knocking volunteering in any way, shape or form, we all do it, but how do we make sure that we aren't shooting ourselves in the foot and shooting the workers in the foot by taking jobs that should be done by fairly paid workers?
I think that is a very good point and made well. So one for us all to think about, but also, you know, that is something that we can perhaps influence locally. So sort of quite a wide variety of questions. I don't know if we could go, I'm going to go Vince, then Salma, then Danny, based on the order you appear on my screen. We've got a bit about how do we sort of future-proof our communities, essentially. Do we need to create those new structures so that as and when future crises hit us, we have built that resilience into our community DNA? some really interesting insights from the Northeast, remembering sort of different challenges in different parts of the country, BAME communities, rises in domestic violence, but also avoiding that complacency that that might start creeping in once people are vaccinated. And then that final point around how do we find the right balance between encouraging positive volunteerism without replacing things that really ought to be provided by the state and should be properly paid roles. So Vince, not much to cover there.
That's it. We've got another 15 hours. Is that right, Anna? That's great. So, no, three really great and wide-ranging questions. There we go. On Colin, I'd respond back to. There's loads to unpack from what you said there. One thing which I was being passionate about long before Zoom was more than a Fat Larry Band song. That's for all the 80s lovers out there. Is who speaks for England? That's for me. So Mark Drayford is there, and Arlene and Nicola, and they're doing their jobs. Two of those three I'd never vote for. Mark, obviously, I would. But who speaks for England? And actually, that's pretty fundamental, because I think when you answer that, then you can roll on to lots of other things in there. But and again, that's something I've been concerned about for some time. One of the other things, apart from Medway, of course, being one of the highest points for coronavirus, is regrettably, Medway also had one of the few UKIP MPs. And I've got no doubt that actually part of the reason why people voted for UKIP and voted to leave the European Union was just a lack of feeling about controlling their life and actually any accountability whatsoever. So I think that's, if you answer that question, Colin, I think some stuff flows from that. I'm not in favour of an English Parliament, for what it's worth. I'd rather see devolved regional government. I think that works. But I accept entirely others will say an English Parliament is good. But let's have that conversation. Let's start that conversation, because actually, yeah, we're going to need more of these sorts of things to happen moving forward. So who speaks for England? Who speaks for local government? I would say, actually, we've got some brilliant speakers from the Northeast and Northwest. If you think about people who I think have shone from a political perspective, I would say Andy Burnham. I'd say Nick Forbes, leader in Newcastle and obviously leader of the LGA Labour group. I would say Judith Blake, or soon to be Baroness Blake. And Simon Hennig as well in Durham, of course, home of Barnard Castle, which he had to deal with, not personally, let me add that. So I certainly think from a Labour in local government, Labour and Co-operative in local government perspective, we've got some very strong voices there. But I agree with you that actually that narrative can also happen. And let me put in a plug for Kent is not London as well, because we get equally hacked off by the Southeast being bundled into London. I'm originally from Islington, so I have love for all. So yeah, I think that's, critically important. Again, kind of ties into that first point. On charities, I can't even say that word. It's a great word, Steve, that I'm going to try and learn to pronounce properly. When we were all inspired by Captain Tom, a great friend of mine who's an activist, sent me a text to say, is there a narrative here that they're going to effectively end up saying the NHS is a charity? And I said, actually, I know why you asked me that. I don't think that will happen, but we just need to be cognizant of that, because actually, don't forget, this is the same government 10 years ago that talked about the big society. Well, frankly, it took a global pandemic for that to mean something in real terms. But actually, I think you're right, Steve. We need to be on guard and on watch to make sure that we don't see those things put through. And that's from all elements. We shouldn't have food banks. We shouldn't have food banks, full stop. The fact that we've got food banks, the fact that they're being run so effectively, shouldn't therefore mean we don't have a welfare state. The welfare state is not 3 vouchers from the Trussell Trust. So your issue is very well raised. I think we need to collectively work hard on that. And I need to learn how to pronounce that word of charitization, because I'm really struggling with it. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anna.
nonetheless, content more important than pronunciation of one word. That was really interesting and good insights. Thank you. Danny, I seem to have lost Salma, so your time to shine comes sooner. So just any reflections you've got on sort of future-proofing new structures, reflections on sort of a voice for England, if that's of interest. Although obviously in London we're lucky to have Sadiq who speaks up for the capital. Sort of reflections on BAME communities or sort of domestic violence and ways that the council can tackle some of the unseen impacts of COVID. These aren't, you don't have to do all of these. I'm just doing a reminder because I made some notes, sort of how we think outside the M25 and consider different approaches for different parts of the country, and sort of tackling any complacency that might come from people being vaccinated and thinking that they can do anything they want, that Shobha rightly raised, as well as sort of the issue of getting the balance between encouraging volunteers but equally not decimating the state to a point where we have to rely on volunteers for things that should be delivered by government.
I get all those on a postcard, Anna, and I'll pop them over. I guess really in terms of sort of structures and policies and Colin's point, I mean, what we've seen here is this is a government who are clearly not only anti-devolution, but don't know what to do when people stand up for their own communities. And we saw that with Andy Burnham, and we've seen that with Sadiq, you know, and actually we've also seen, I think, by any measure, the most uncredible government of any colour, you know, of any measure. I mean, they're just, it's difficult, I think, to find the adjective sometimes when kind of like another thing happens, and we've become kind of used to this kind of chaos and this sort of chaotic approach. And one of those things, you know, is clear is that, you know, this is sort of libertarian values, and the reason that we're in this situation is because fundamentally Boris doesn't want to do this, you know, and he gets pushed down, and it all happens so late. But the later things happen, and the more pressure is then put on, you know, the worse the situation has become. And I think that, you know, what we've seen as councils is actually, it's not necessarily about the way that we're organised, although I think actually all of us are probably working much closer at a neighbourhood level than we have been before. And I think that should really stay, and that's something to kind of build on. But I think, you know, that sort of local, regional and national structures, when they're done right, can be really effective. And that cooperation that we believe in, you know, when you kind of see that working through all tiers, I think has real strength. So I'd be more focused, I think, on sort of the missions of what we can try and do together rather than kind of how we're set up. But I think actually more than ever, having, you know, more power at a local level can mean more trust amongst our communities. In terms of Shobha's point, I mean, I think that this north-south narrative is really dangerous. And as a Londoner, I've been really distressed sometimes when, you know, we've gone into lockdown at a different time, and you almost get this sort of jubilation unfolding on social media about, oh, well, kind of here they go, you know. And actually we have got to stop that as a party of cooperators and socialists and collaborators, because actually, you know, there is the same decimation caused by a decade of austerity in Greenwich as there is in Salford. And frankly, you know, we have got to not buy into this narrative about levelling up and remember who's decimated our communities in the first place. And, you know, the most infuriating thing I think about, you know, seeing these pictures which have emerged all over the country of the food boxes in schools and school dinners is actually, yes, let's blame the government, but let's remember that these decisions have been forced onto head teachers and school leaders who've had to make decisions based on price, you know. And actually, when you are cutting budgets relentlessly, what we're now seeing unfolding is the reality of a decade of austerity. You know, that is the real cause, I think, around this school meals nightmare. I think in terms of, you know, kind of how people behave when they're vaccinated, well, what's been missing and what's still missing is a clear plan and a way out. And nobody really knew what the difference was between tier 3 and tier 4 based on any measure. And I think the tier system has completely had it. And actually, is a real need, I think, for the government to set out what those measures are so that people do understand not just what they can do, but what it's based on. And frankly, if there was a bit more of a sense across the country of working towards a sort of shared goal, then you may see, you know, greater compliance. But equally, let's not start blaming people for doing the wrong thing, because actually I think fundamentally it's the government who've consistently failed to do the right thing, which means we've got the issues that we've got. And you know, tonight in Greenwich we'll have 20,000 kids who are going to bed and waking up tomorrow morning in poverty, and next month we're going to have more, because actually all of our unemployment figures are growing. And clearly, you know, we do need, I think, linked to Steve's point, not just a plan around volunteering and people kind of filling in and doing that community help bit, but we need a proper economic plan about how we're going to recover from this, you know, and actually where we're going to need to invest in our communities to grow those jobs. To be absolutely honest, you know, around the high street, and you know, interesting really that in some senses, I think probably COVID has finished off what Amazon had started in many places. And actually, that's a huge challenge for all of us in local government around how we're going to respond to, you know, kind of places and streets, which frankly are going to be empty, decimated, you know, potential places for crime and antisocial behaviour. How are we going to incentivise some of these new industries, new people we need to get back, so that we can actually provide jobs and build confidence in our communities? And I think that kind of plan for the COVID recovery, and I'm not just talking about the bank holiday bender, which is allegedly on the cards, you know, this is a long-term, you know, kind of 10-year answer that we all need. And I think we, as sort of Labour and cooperative councillors, need to be front and centre of sort of setting that out.
Thank you. And I'm really pleased that I found Salma back on the call. So Salma, I don't know if you wanted to come in with any thoughts and unmute yourself. We're sort of exploring how we create the structures in our communities that help us to address future crises, talking a bit about BEN communities, how we avoid complacency when people are getting the vaccine, but also how we get that balance right between volunteering and things that should have been delivered by the state. I've now lost her again. We're going to have to get Salma back another day. So I will do a bit of a wrap up. There have been so many questions and really interesting comments and points made. So I've made a note of them, but I don't think we're going to have time to get all of them answered today. I just want to sort of flag a few that I think are particularly interesting. One, a very valid comment that in Wales we have a Labour and cooperative health minister, and that the difference in quality of communication has been marked. So just sort of to help spur us on to action in these elections as they come up, to get more cooperators into places where decisions are made, and where briefings are made. I think there was some really interesting questions specifically on how we stopped cooperatives and small cooperatives post-Brexit. We're actually talking at sort of our virtual party HQ about how we support co-ops post-Brexit. So rather than ask it today, know that it's a topic on our mind that we're hoping to be able to come to in a whole Zoom of its own. Too big, perhaps, just for now. And I am going to finish on a really, I think, uplifting message from Chris Hall that we should all bear in mind, that COVID-19 has shown that if the UK puts some willpower behind something, the government can do anything it fancies, whether it is getting homeless people off the streets into hotels, or creating a vaccine rapidly, building a swathe of Nightingale hospitals. So given all these things we were told we couldn't do, the government has found a way of doing. How do we use that to our advantage? And I think that's a really interesting thought to leave ourselves with, and to take back into our own communities. What are those things that we were told were maybe pie in the sky, or we had to start small, or changes that we want to see happen, that we're able to actually find a way to say yes to and make happen because the situation requires it. And I know I've got a list as long as my arm of things I'd like to do, and I think we all need that reminder that actually when organisations set their mind to something, they can do far more than we're sometimes led to believe, and the same goes for government as well. So on that note, I'm left saying a massive thank you to Danny, Vince, and in her absence, Salma. It's been a really, really interesting evening. I hope you're all feeling so inspired by the impact that Labour and cooperative councillors can make, that you're all dialing up your dialogue as we speak, ready to get on the virtual doorstep and persuade people to vote for our candidates. But a big thank you to everybody for your contributions, questions, comments in the chat this evening, and for sharing your Wednesday evening with us. I'm sure we will see lots of you again soon on a future Zoom call. We'll be back to running these regularly as we did last year, because what else are we going to do when we're all stuck at home in our 29th lockdown? So thank you very much. Look after yourselves and stay home and stay safe. And thank you to our speakers again. Bye all.